Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are breaking down all things Week 8. We got 14 games on the slate. I'm excited. You're excited. Let's get to it. I brought in a very special guest to get this done. You all know him. He's on here every other week. Dwain McFarland, PFF, established a run. You may have seen his utilization report. One of the single best, if not the best, even if we'll go on a ledge, piece of fantasy football information you can find out there on the internet. Dwain, what's going on, bro?
Wow, man, I don't even know what to say after that. But thank you. I appreciate that. I think you put out some pretty good stuff. There's some pretty quality content out there. But yeah, man, I'm excited to be here. Definitely have some utilization nuggets to share with the folks today, along with some matchup stuff. So looking forward to jumping in and breaking down Week 8.
Dwain and I are going through all these matchups. We're each going to give, try to focus on one thing per team. I'm going to take the away squads. Dwain has home, okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about some special situations. But the goal is to give you all a nice early week fresher. Of course, everyone still has time before the weekend to change our minds, and particularly so if we're wrong in what we're saying right now. So without further ado, let's get going. We got the Falcons at the Panthers. We got Carolina opening up and staying around that 2.5 point favorite mark. Over under at 51.5 is down to 49 though. And I just want to talk about Matt Ryan and what he's done with a healthy Julio Jones this season, because we have week 1 against the Seahawks and he goes for 450 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cowboys 273 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Vikings 371 yards and 4 touchdowns. Most recently, he faces the Lions, 338 yards, 1 touchdown. Could have been a win if Todd Gurley could just restrain himself from quite falling into the end zone. So look, Matt Ryan's arm, it looks as good as ever. I mean, just the deep routes that Ridley and Julio are consistently able to win on. Ryan's always putting that ball exactly where it needs to be, and we're starting to see him, develop further chemistry with Hayden Hurst. So it's been good, but I just think that, throughout this year, we've seen Matthew Stafford without Kenny Galladay struggle, Gardner Minshew without DJ Chark. Like, we need to realize that not everyone is going to be Aaron Rodgers and just keep balling out without their number one wide receiver. Perfectly understandable if some of these guys, particularly in lesser schemes with lesser offensive lines, will struggle when these guys are leaving, and particularly so when we look at just how wildly efficient Ryan has been with Julio and Calvin Ridley throughout his career. Matt Ryan has fed 24 players at least 50 career targets. Calvin Ridley's at 10.1 adjusted yards per target. Julio's at 9.7. Those marks ranked first and third respectively. And if you're wondering what number 2 is, Taylor Gabriel, still a free agent. Maybe go get him. I don't know. So basically, do not be too hard on these QBs when the number one wide receiver isn't there, particularly when someone the caliber of Julio Jones. Keep firing up Matt Ryan as a QB1 as long as Julio is on the field. Dwain, what's up with the Panthers?
Yeah, man, with the Panthers this week, obviously the line is coming down, but we still expect this to be a shootout, even though it's a Thursday night game. I look at Bridgewater as a QB1 this week. If you look at Atlanta, they're giving up on average 6.4 points more to the quarterbacks they face than what the quarterbacks are averaging coming into the game. So I think it's a good week for Bridgewater. What's funny about Atlanta, and this is how fantasy works, right? This isn't like going and looking at DVOA or actually, real stats. But, running backs don't fare, as well against Atlanta. But the good thing for Carolina is their backs stay involved in the passing game. There's a slight chance, that CMC could be available for this game. I don't know that they would give him a full workload. In fact, the coach speak today on the street, I don't know if we believe it or not, Ian, but it's that Mike Davis is going to have a role, that he's earned that. But he's also dealing with a little bit of a tweaked ankle as well for himself. So, for me, if CMC is out there, I'm probably going to lean to using him over Mike Davis in this matchup, but it could be a tough call. That's if you own both. If you don't own both and you own one or the other, so maybe you just own Mike Davis, you'll just have to look at, what your options are. If you've got a bye week issue, I wouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah, I think this could be the 1 week where it's still a somewhat split backfield. But once McCaffrey's healthy, come on. They got 64 million reasons to play this guy. And, even you would have to go all the way back to 2017 to find a game where McCaffrey played fewer than 85% of the offensive snaps and wasn't injured. So coach speak this, coach speak that. Unfortunately, I think Mike Davis will be back on the bench sooner rather than later. Next matchup, we got the Steelers at the Ravens. For some reason, this hasn't been flexed to Sunday night. Come on, it's not too late, NFL. Do everyone a favor and get that Eagles-Cowboys game at 1 o'clock and off national TV where it belongs. Anyway, Ravens open as 5.5 point favorites. That's down to 3.5. Also got the over-under dropping from 49 to 46.5. So I want to talk a little bit about Big Ben here because, this has just been the most brutal matchup really for any quarterback to face for the better part of the last 2 seasons. Only Patrick Mahomes, and he's done it twice, has thrown for more than 225 yards with multiple touchdowns against this Ravens secondary since week 1 of last season. They've been even more dominant since they acquired Marcus Peters halfway through the 2019 2019 season. So you look at Big Ben this year. Yes, they're 6-0. Win is a win is a win. Roethlisberger, they need him to stay healthy. So the fact he is being more of a game manager this year is great for the Steelers' end goal, which is obviously winning the Super Bowl. But for fantasy purposes, it's not that great because right now he's averaging a career low 7.8 yards per for just his average target depth. And in this matchup against a loaded secondary and an offense that I still just feel like doesn't really have a real identity with all these receivers shuffling around, and James Conner's getting his workhorse rollback, which is good to see. But I just don't know that this is truly a 6-0 team that is gonna go win a matchup this tough. So I don't want to call the Steelers frauds. They're a very good team. I just don't think they're quite as good as their record indicates at this point. To see the line dropping in favor of Pittsburgh, still 3.5 point underdogs, but I do think they get humbled a little bit by a Ravens team that should be plenty fresh coming off the bye. Dwayne, who you got on Baltimore?
Yeah, man, I think this could be a funnel situation this week for Hollywood Brown. First, he's in a great situation. 33% of his targets come on play action. 40% of his targets come up against a linebacker or safety in primary coverage. They use a lot of the play action to get him to the middle of the field. And if you look at Pittsburgh, to your point, they've got some holes, that are bigger than what a lot of people, really think. And they're giving up plus 8.7 points to wide receivers. So wide receivers coming in there averaging plus 8.7 versus what they are coming into that game versus the Steelers. So I think that really looks good, for Hollywood, especially if it's a situation where the Ravens do have to score more points, if the Steelers are able to make it interesting. Tight ends, is a minus 5.6. The Steelers are actually pretty good at defending tight ends. So Andrews could, you're always going to start Mark Andrews if you got him. I just, I wouldn't necessarily make him a play in DFS this weekend, though. If you can, you're just going to kind of fade that. They're also a tougher matchup against running backs. So even if Mark Ingram is out and you're thinking about Dobbins or Gus Edwards, you probably want to try to avoid that if you can, and plus we just still don't know what the Ravens are going to do. They, with the way they are, they'll activate, they'll have Justice Hill in the game, and it'll go back to being a three-way split. They love to get all these guys involved. So I wouldn't get overly excited about Dobbins this weekend, even though you may have paid a high draft pick for him.
Yeah, hopefully we get that, post-bye week, we see a rookie get more involved. That happened to DeAndre Swift. But just based on the first half usage and what we've kind of seen, even dating back to last season, I am with you. It's not looking great for J.K. Dobbins. 2021, though, it'll be a different conversation then. Next matchup on the docket, we got the Jets at the Chiefs. Kansas City opens up as 21-point favorites. That is down to 19.5. Oh my gosh, man. 48-point over-under holding steady. So with the Jets, with Jamison Crowder still banged up with this groin injury, that pretty much leaves us with one viable guy. Maybe you're really drinking the Denzel Mims Kool-Aid, but I think La'Mical Perine is the main guy that, everyone should be kind of worried about on the Jets side of the ball. And kudos to him. He led the way last week in the backfield, got 67% of the offensive snaps, 11 carries and 2 targets. Ty Johnson was completely out of the picture. We saw Frank Gore still getting 31% snaps and 11 carries himself. He's not going away. To me, this is similar to the DeAndre Swift situation with the Lions, where we have a rookie that leads the offense in snaps and targets, but they got to deal with this veteran early down grinder that is not leaving anytime soon. So what's the big difference here? Obviously, the Lions are light years better than the Jets on offense. So this is not, I'm not comparing Perine to Swift as a fantasy player, but just there's situations with having that annoying, veteran back that's going to consistently be stealing double-digit carries, not ideal. So Perine, for me, probably going to be on that borderline of top 30 options at RB. There's worse guys you can have than, someone's going to flirt with 10 or 15 touches per week. But, this Jets offense, 20 points over the last 3 games. And even in a matchup against the Chiefs where, hey, it's going to be comeback mode and maybe targets for Perine. He only had 2 last week, and we're going to be seeing this again and again. So if you can help it, just please don't play Jets unless it's a healthy Jamison Crowder. Dwayne, what's up with the Chiefs?
Yeah, man, I agree on Perine. I think he's right there in that 30, top 30 range. And, he can help you, from a bye week standpoint. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Played, like you said, with the snap, 70%. But the key is he gets all of the long down and distance. He gets all of the 2-minute work. Well, what are the Jets constantly in? Long down and distance and 2-minute work. So, to your point, this is not about real football. This is about fantasy football. So especially in PPR formats, Perine can have some low-end value and help get you through some lean weeks, especially with all the injuries we've seen. As far as the Chiefs go, it's hard to get too excited, right, about anybody because it's going to be such a blowout. The line is huge and it should be huge. And in these kind of situations, it's really tough, for fantasy owners. You're going to start your Chiefs Chiefs, right? You're going to start them no matter what. But you know that a lot of them are probably going to be rested by the third, as soon as the third quarter, at the latest the fourth quarter. A lot of these guys are going to get time off. We could see Le'Veon Bell revenge game here. Maybe, they jump out to a huge lead and let Bell come out there and just work them over for maybe a quarter and a half in the second, half of the game. I could see that as a certain possibility. If not, it's at least, a nice narrative. But the thing I would say about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Bell, we still don't know enough. I think Bell was still, probably limited to a very, select number of plays that they felt comfortable with, that they knew, that he knew the play. And so they were getting him in those types of situations. But last week, he didn't get on the field at all for long down and distance. He didn't get on the field at all in the 2-minute offense, which really those are areas where you would expect in the future for him to contribute. I mean, for goodness sakes, Darrell Williams was the guy getting that work before. But what was interesting is Darrell Williams was active, as so was DeAndre Washington for that matter. But, Clyde Edwards-Helaire actually saw his highest number of long down and distance snaps this year was 60%. And they didn't have a 2-minute offense situation because they were blowing the Broncos out pretty much the whole game. So Edwards-Helaire, let's keep an eye on it. Who knows? They may not use Bell in the passing game. They may want him to be more of a guy, taking more of the carries, and they want to get Edwards-Helaire, involved in the passing game more. He was certainly good at that at LSU. So I think, the jury's still out. But I will say that, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I do think we've seen, his best days this season because it's going to just cap, that upside. So as far as, your Chiefs, you're going to be starting them, but at the same time, you're not overly excited just because it could be a blowout. Oh, one other quick note. What's interesting, man, Byron Pringle is now outplaying Mecole Hardman.
Yeah, we know, Dwayne. Quit reminding us, man. God.
Well, I think, honestly, like from a football terms perspective, Hardman's he's terrible at run blocking. So when they get out to these leads, there's not really a use for him. In the games where they're in tighter situations and they need more firepower, I think those are going to be the situations where you're going to continue to see Hardman, get utilized more. And when he's on the field, they'll take more shots. But Pringle, is a much tougher Z-type receiver. He's a decent player in his own right. He was very underrated coming out of college. But last week, 62% of the routes. The week before, 50% of the routes. He's not seeing a ton of targets. But just a guy to keep an eye on, if you're in a super deep dynasty type format, if he's not rostered, he's a guy just to keep in mind. If they play for the Chiefs and there's a chance they could turn into a top 3 target for Patrick Mahomes, that's always something you're paying attention to.
And for the record, I'm very well aware that most people probably did not know that stat about Byron Pringle. But as someone that, spent way too much time this summer touting Mecole Hardman as, the best handcuff wide receiver in the league, it is incredible to me that even with Sammy Watkins out, they cannot get a guy that broke the record book for most yards per target as a rookie, more opportunities.
He still might be the most valuable handcuff. Maybe just the wrong receiver is hurt.
No,
Sammy is really the handcuff with Robinson, I think, and then that moves Robinson from that Z spot and opens it up for Pringle. But if Tyreek Hill were to go down, I think we could see a potentially different situation.
That's fair, and it was me putting a little too much faith into a situation that I did not know as much as I thought I knew. So always be careful, everyone, with these backup situations. We get burned Alexander Madison, even though I think that was just a low range. But regardless, someone new's coming up into a role that we have not directly seen before. Do not act like Ian Hartitz and know you know everything there is to know about Mecole Hardman and the Chiefs. Next matchup here, we got the Titans at the Bengals. Titans opened up at 3.5 point favorites. Now they are up to 5.5 over under holding steady at 55. So, Dwayne, it was 2 weeks ago. It was A.J. Brown's first game back. We were recording the podcast during Titans-Bills, and the guy found the end zone while we were recording. It's been destiny. We've been sticking true to A.J.B. wide receiver 1 season all year on the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, and it's been great so far. He's gotten 23 of 32 targets for 332 yards and 4 scores. And look, he's regressed, just like everyone else thought he would, because you can't be as good as he was in 2019 and 2020. He's gone from 12.5 yards per target down to 10.4. His yards after the catch per reception has gone down from 9.4 to 6.3. Guess what? Those are both still very great numbers. They're just not, again, setting records for like what we've really seen from rookies in recent memory here and the type of workload he had. And the big change that we, expected with the regression. This is the thing. And, we've seen this with regression before where, guys have the crazy passing passing touchdown rates, and they regress. But, there's a regression in the efficiency, but we don't pay enough attention to when the volume goes up the following year because the guy just got done having such a great season. Why wouldn't the Titans throw A.J. Brown the ball more after what he did in 2019? And that's exactly what we've seen this year. 5.3 targets per game in 2019. That's all the way up to 8. And look, Tannehill is being more trusted than ever. We're seeing them really just not afraid to lean on him anymore, as they shouldn't be. The guy's been playing fantastic over these past 2 years, and they're making a concerted effort to get A.J. Brown the ball because he's a stud. 5 targets inside the 10-yard line. 4 of those have been caught for scores. We finally started to see some of that big-time yak ability flash itself last week. It's awesome. I still don't even think he's operating at 100%, man, which is wild that he's still putting up these sorts of numbers. We're seeing him miss at Thursday practices, but for the rest of the year, when he's out there, A.J. Brown, it's a top 12 wide receiver, everyone. You love to see it. Dwayne, what's going on with the Bengals?
Yeah, one other thing on the volume, right, is, Tennessee's just running far more plays. Mike Vrabel's always had his thumb, on the offense pretty much year in, year out. It was crazy, Ian. You would see him running 55 plays a game. 50 plays a game. If you look at this year, they're averaging 70, right, which is slightly over the league average. Just by the volume alone that's running through the Titans' offense as they've opened up things more, that's a huge thing for Brown. So even if his target shares technically stay the same as they did last year, the volume alone lifts him. Now, if he continues to take on more of the targets, right, we could see even bigger things to come, from Brown. And the only other thing I would say about it is efficiency is going to come down when your play volumes go up, because part of what that means is, one, your defense isn't playing as well, which we'll talk about the Bengals here in just a second. But whenever you think about, these games where you're getting, behind in some cases, they're not going to use the play action quite as much, and some of those things are what drive your efficiency. But the good news for Brown is, the rates are still really high around play action. His air yards are still solid, and like you said, even though yards after the catch are down, that's still really, elite numbers. As far as the Bengals go, pretty much, like, Ian, this situation is like smoke them if you got them, this weekend. If you look at, from a quarterback standpoint, they've got the 4th best matchup. If again, the way I look at this metric is you take the average of the quarterbacks coming in playing the Titans, and then what's the difference, right, versus the Titans, and it's a plus 3.7. Running backs, the 5th best. Now you're dealing with Gio most likely this week. Mixon still, looks like he's going to be iffy, but wide receiver, man, is the 4th best matchup, plus 7.6. And I have to mention, I know we're both big T. Higgins fans, and that remains, but I have to give a small shout out here to A.J. Green. I know a lot of people got fed up with him. There was probably, the rage drop. I'm not going to say I didn't maybe do that. But, when you look at Green over the last 2 weeks, man, it's pretty insane. 24 targets over the last 2 games. That's 28% and 28% over those 2 games. And then if you look at his air yards, 341 air yards over the last 2 games. Average depth of target, 13.1, 15.2. If there's a game, the guy's due to blow up, even though he may look, he's actually looking a little better. So maybe he had some health issues going on. He still doesn't look like the old A.J. Green that we're used to. But I think A.J. Green this week, man, I consider him, he's a fringe wide receiver 1 in this matchup. Everyone has torched the Titans, and you already mentioned the line and how close it looks. This could easily be a shootout.
I am with you there. And yeah, A.J. Green, the biggest change I think I've seen kind of in the usage, he's still getting the air yards, but it seems like Burrow has just accepted that Green is not going to get his step on anybody, and he's just throwing the back shoulder as much as possible. And Green, he's still a big guy, and he's able to come down with the contested catches. So, it's a rookie getting more chemistry with his wide receiver 1 as they continue to play together. Who would have thought? And you are not the only one out there to rage drop A.J. Green, so don't beat yourself up too bad about that. I'm beating myself up right along there with you. Rams at Dolphins up next. We got the Rams sitting as 3.5-point favorites. Over under is at 49. So it's a little bit unclear if Sean McVay hates Cam Akers personally or just professionally. But, regardless, we got to kind of move on and just accept what it's been. After saying that the rookie's role would be increasing following that Week 5 game where Akers had the long run against Washington, he has had 0 touches over the last 2 weeks. I believe he did get a rush attempt on Monday night, but it got just, it was a holding penalty or something, so it didn't go down in the books. However you want to slice it, he is just far and away the RB3. it's not even fair to really call him an RB3 in this offense because he is just more or less a bench player that gets on the field for maybe 1 or 2 snaps. Will this change? I don't really know because last year we saw pretty much the same thing happen with Darrell Henderson, and it really didn't change all season. So Henderson has been the lead back, 14 touches in all but 1 game since week 2, and why not? He's PFF's third highest graded running. He has PFF's third highest rushing grade among 69 qualified backs. And look, I mean, this matchup, I think we're finally getting to the point. I'm knocking on wood as I'm saying this, but I think we're finally getting to the point that we can start to treat Henderson as a weekly top 20 option at the position. Dolphins, much better pass defense than they are against the run. They've allowed the 8th most PPR points per game to opposing RBs. Again, it's a little bit annoying that Malcolm Brown is staying as involved as he is, and I don't think he's going away anytime soon, but there's not this, okay, Malcolm Brown might get a touchdown on the goal line, but it's not like every time they get inside the 5-yard line, they're just actively yanking Henderson off the field in favor of Brown. Usually, whoever's in there in this series and they get inside the 5-yard line, that guy is going to get those touches more times than not, unless there's some weird stoppage of play going on. So Henderson, I'm firing up as an RB2 this week, and Brown, hey, you can do worse than 10 plus touches per game potentially inside of one of the league's more run-heavy offenses, but he's always going to be more of a touchdown-dependent RB3, I think, here moving forward. Dwayne, it's Tua time. What's up?
Yeah, man. Just quickly on Brown, I think you hit a lot of good points. Really his key role is he's the guy they trust in the 2-minute offense. He's the guy they trust on long down and distance situations. So he's seeing 85% of the work in 2-minute offense, 80% of the work on 3rd down or 4th down and plus 7 yards to go. Inside the 5, he's only got 41% of the snaps, which I say only. That's, pretty good. But it's like you said, he's not out there all the time. He only has 23% of the rushing attempts inside the 5. So really when he's out there, a lot of times that's a longer down and distance situation where they're getting him on the field. And you actually saw that some last night. You saw some plays where they were down there with Henderson. You get to 3rd down, even though you're inside the 5, inside the 7-8 yard line, they bring Brown in because he's just the guy they trust in that situation. So I agree. There's things that could be worse, but he should be rostered in most formats because, man, we don't know. I mean, Akers can't get on the field even in these blowout type scenarios, which is really concerning because you think they would just want to keep Henderson healthy and let him run out there, but they're not. As far as Tua time goes, man, this is a situation that for me I'm just avoiding. This weekend. It's not a great matchup against the Rams. It's the 5th worst matchup from a fantasy perspective for quarterback. We got a rookie playing. You're going to have Jalen Ramsey, probably taking away Devontae Parker, who's still nursing an injury, by the way. You got Preston Williams, who's still just not, they don't seem to quite trust him fully yet. His routes are bouncing around all around. They'll be down in the 60s, then up to the 70s, then down to the 60s. So they're rotating a lot of guys in and out. It's a neutral matchup for tight end, and Gesicki's, running plenty of routes. He's seeing, plenty of work. So, I mean, he could be involved. But I think it's just a situation to avoid, for this weekend. I'm not going to look to use anything from that matchup, on the Dolphins side, even for punt plays, anything like that in DFS. I'm fully avoiding it if I can. If I have to start Parker because, I don't have another option, I will, but I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a wait-and-see approach. We got to realize that Ryan Fitzpatrick has been playing really well this year, and it's not a guarantee that Tua, coming off the bench is going to be able to replicate that, particularly when it comes to, predicting how the other fantasy production of the guys are going to be. All right, we got the Colts at the Lions next. Colts are sitting as 3-point favorites, over-unders at 51. You hear that, everyone? You hear that? Listen. That's Jonathan Taylor's buy low or buy even window closing as we speak right now. Told you last week, telling you this week again, go get Jonathan Taylor before the top 5 upside that we have been hoping for since week 1 when Marlon Mack went down will come to fruition. Week 8, we got the Lions. After that, listen to this schedule. Ravens, Titans, Packers, Titans, Texans, Raiders, Texans. And when you're in the fantasy championship, because you got Jonathan Taylor, you got to take on the Steelers in week 16. So that's unfortunate. I understand the Ravens isn't a cakewalk either. Otherwise, every single matchup is versus defense that ranks 18th or worse in PPR points per game allowed to opposing RBs. We've seen Jordan Wilkins get a combination of hurt and also just kind of phase out of the offense a little bit in recent weeks. Nyheim Hines is more and more just being used as, more of a pass down only back. That's not ideal, but we always knew Jonathan Taylor wasn't going to get that role. What the role he does have is as the undisputed early down grinder in this offense with more targets than we were expecting anyway. So schedule could not be better. We've seen with Miles Sanders, numerous rookie running backs over the year. They get much better after the bye and particularly into the second half of the season. season. Everything's working in Jonathan Taylor's favor. I understand that he's not going to be the cheapest guy to go out there and get, but if people are treating him like the borderline RB1 that he's been, try to get him right now because he truly still has, another step to leap before we see him at his true potential in 2020 and beyond. Dwayne, what's going up with the lines?
Yeah, man, as far as the Lions go, I think we talked about this last time, but they're just, they're not living up to the potential really that, we had hoped. As far as a passing offense goes, from a Swift perspective, we heard last week he was going to really get his role expanded. He kind of did, technically the coaching staff was telling the truth because they gave him more attempts, but then they took away 75% of his long down and distance work. They took away 75% of his 2-minute work, and they gave that to Kerryon Johnson. So there's still 3 guys involved, but what I will say that's really nice for Swift, if you look over the last 2 weeks, his first read targets, which the average for a running back in the league last year was 37%, his first read targets are 75% and 80%. So even though they're taking away some of that, work on the long down and distance stuff, they're really trying to get him involved in the game plan. They want to scheme up plays to get the ball in his hands. His average depth of target is beyond the line of scrimmage, which is always good. That's what you see with the guys like Kamara, McCaffrey, some of the guys that really put up some of the better fantasy points, so he's obviously right there on the fringe. He's a fringe RB2 right now. You're still going to have some bumps and bruises, dealing with him in your lineup weekly, but he could continue to keep on taking on a little bit more of the work. The last thing I'll say is, the matchup is not really great, across the board. Running back is neutral, but from a quarterback standpoint, it's the 5th worst matchup of the week. Wide receivers, it's the worst matchup, that was the last game. On the wide receivers, it's actually the 7th best matchup of the week, but against tight ends, it's the 4th worst. So there's an opportunity here for Galladay, to get going. He's got 245 air yards over the last 2 weeks. So I mean, he's pretty much due. He's not seeing 10, 12 targets, but the 6 to 8 that he sees, are continue to be down the field, and we just need him and Stafford to get their mojo going, man. And I think he could still really finish the season strong.
I'm going to say it. I think the Colts defense is pretty fraudulent, man. I don't think they played anyone to this point. Jaguars, Vikings, Jets, Bears, Browns, and then Bengals in the game that they very nearly lost if they didn't get that big comeback. So we'll see, man. I think Stafford, Galladay, I think they get cooking. I hear what you're saying. I like your, system for determining good matchups, but still early season sample. I'm expecting the Lions to have some success through the airs. Next matchup, we got the Patriots at the Bills. Buffalo sitting as 3.5-point favorites. Over under a 45.5 is down to 44. So it was a somber weekend. The Hartitz household having to watch that Cam Newton performance. He really hasn't been the same thrower since that Week 2 Seattle game, which honestly feels like it was 20 years ago at this point. All in all, 9 of 15, 98 scoreless yards, 3 picks. Hard to rationalize that game as anything other than awful. Luckily, Belichick, is already going out there and saying, look, Cam's absolutely remaining the starter, but offense looks just so broke at the moment. And until we see anything improve here, I don't really know how we can treat anyone in the offense other than maybe Cam as a potential fantasy option, because I think the move, if they really want to get back to what was giving them most of success early on, I think it is using Cam Newton as, the guy to spearhead this physical rushing attack. And I think they have the matchup to make that happen. And okay, we'll see with the Bills, because they haven't been a good defense all year, even though they really have the talent to be good. They were very good in 2019, even in games against the Chiefs, where people were kind of really hating on them for that strategy, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire was running all over them. They just want to take the game out of Patrick Mahomes' hands. So I don't want to say that they have this god-awful run defense, because they really might not. It might be more of a schematic thing in how they're trying to play opposing offenses. But either way, this year they ranked 19th in yards before contact per attempt, 22nd in yards per carry, and 24th in explosive run percentage allowed. So I think it'll be a good test to find out if this Bills defense can step up and stop the run when they really need to, because to me, the best way, for this Patriots offense to get back on track would be try to ride Cam Newton, Damian Harris, and just grind the hell out of the ball. So we'll see what happens. Something's got to give. Deep down in my heart of hearts, I do just have a lot of concern about this Patriots offense getting back on track anytime soon with the way things are going currently. Dwayne, are you optimistic at all about Cam? And then hit me with some Bills talk.
The Patriots need somebody to help stretch the field. That's really what's happening here. Nobody really respects any of the vertical prowess of Cam Newton right now, and it's not necessarily his fault. He doesn't really have a lot of options, so there's just no respect. And so teams now know what the Patriots want to do, and they're crowding the line. They're doing everything they need to basically make Cam check out of run plays, or basically daring him, look, if you're going to try it, go ahead, but that's what we're prepared to stop. They're daring them to try to beat them deep and to do some different things, and they just don't have the personnel to do it. And so they're kind of stuck. So they need to look at making a move, and I know they're the worst at trading for receivers, so they'll probably overpay, but maybe you can get a guy like John Ross for cheap. Just somebody else that can get out there, give you a little bit of, hey, you do have to pay attention to this guy. I know they have Damiere Byrd, but Damiere Byrd's just never really done anything, in his career. And I know John Ross isn't, like any great shakes, but we've seen him in a few games. Actually, he can uncork it, and so I think he would be an option, somebody along those lines. So they've got to do something there. I think it's going to continue to be a problem. As far as, the Bills, rushing attack, like what you were talking about, as far as, how the game could potentially go. I mean, Zach Moss is basically back to splitting, the work. Devin Singletary really had a chance to kind of take this job and run with it. He just wasn't able to. So last week you saw 54% of the snaps to Singletary, 47% of the snaps to Zach Moss. Target shares, routes 38% and 36%. Targets 10% and 8%. Rushing attempts 33% and 29%. It doesn't really get that much closer, like other than just an exact split. Singletary's still slightly ahead. They do like Singletary in the 2-minute offense, but they, are working Zach Moss in the long down and distance, and they prefer him inside the 5-yard line. So they each kind of split the work, and they have their little specialty that each one gets that could kind of tilt, their touches one way or another, depending on the way a game script goes. But it's pretty much a split at this point. And if I am trying to target one of these guys, if I want to own one, I think Moss is the guy I want to own, because I feel like, if there is a guy at this point that could take over the backfield, I think my chip's on him, because I feel like we've already seen Singletary, have his chance to do it.
It's a fair point. And further complicating matters for both guys, the reality that Josh Allen this year, 4th lowest check down rate among 38 qualified QBs. And of course, he is always prone to take off for the end zone himself once they get down inside the 10-yard line. Before we keep on going here, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors at Monkey Knife Fight. All first-time depositors at Monkey Knife Fight that put at least $20 in their account while using promo code PFF will receive a free PFF Edge annual subscription. That's a $40 value for just $20, and you'll get the opportunity to turn that $20 into even more money playing daily fantasy and prop games at one of the fastest growing fantasy sports sites in the USA, Monkey Knife Fight. So go to Monkey Knife Fight, deposit your $20 with promo code PFF, and receive your free PFF Edge annual subscription. Next matchup here, we got the Raiders at the Browns. Saw Cleveland open up at 3.5. Now they're down to just 2.5 point favorites. Over under down a point as well from 55.5 to 54.5. So I did not anticipate becoming one of Derek Carr's biggest defenders in the 2020 season. But you know what? We roll with the punches. We watch the film, grind the metrics, and we react accordingly. As I think you said 2 weeks ago, Dwayne, so elegantly, ultimately our job is to kind of present information in a smart and hopefully entertaining way. So that's what I'm trying to do with my guy, Derek Carr. Never thought I would utter those words, but look, he's got 5 games this year, 250 plus passing yards and at least 2 touchdowns. He only had 4 such games the entire 2019 season, only 3 games in 2018, only 3 games like that in 2017. So because of this, we're seeing more than just Darren Waller emerge as an actual viable fantasy option. Nelson Aguilar and Henry Ruggs are legit viable fantasy guys in this matchup, because this is looking like a complete potential shootout. I understand, we got Falcons-Panthers, Vikings-Packers, even Titans-Bengals. There are other games that you think might shoot out a little bit harder, but I'm not sure if either of these defenses can slow down these offenses. And for Carr to be spearheaded the way he is, I am fine treating him as a borderline QB1. I believe I have him ranked as a QB 13 this week, because he is the QB 13 in fantasy points per game this season. So he's been keeping it up. Gruden, I think a lot of people kind of scoffed when he came back and just wondered how being out of the league for 10 years would do. But his play design's really been the least of their problems over these past few seasons. So I know Myles Garrett's a beast. We have seen pressure, been the undoing of Carr a little bit over these years, but as a whole, the Browns ranked just 18th in pressure rate. So last week, 9 targets from Nelson Aguilar, only 3 for Ruggs. I think that evens out to some extent. We know Waller's still the overwhelming number 1 option, but don't be afraid to take some shots on these wide receivers, particularly in DFS this week. Maybe not quite as much in season long, because we do kind of worry about that overall target ceiling, but Carr, Waller, Ruggs, or Carr, Waller, Aguilar, I don't know. Go win yourself a tournament. Who knows? Crazier things have happened. Dwayne, what's going on with the Browns?
Yeah, I like the call on Carr, and you're right. We're just reacting, to what we're seeing, and I agree with you. I think that he's right there in the QB1 conversation. And they're getting healthier. They're only going to continue to get healthier. Assuming they have no more setbacks. But yeah, as far as the Browns go, the big news is Odell Beckham Jr. is done for the season due to an ACL. So that really opens up the door for Hollywood Higgins, the other Hollywood. He was actually the first Hollywood. I guess currently there's been so many Hollywoods, Hollywood Henderson to go back to the Cowboys. But, we've got two Hollywoods going, but this is really Higgins, and he's going to step right into the Beckham role. He did so last week. He had 110 yards receiving. And what's nice, about the role, and we've talked about it before with Beckham, it's a lot of play action. So you see a lot of really juicy looks. He's a solid athlete. He can run after the catch. He can stretch the field. So I think really, he'll be a boom bust wide receiver 3, type, depending on your format. If you're in a smaller league, obviously he's lower than that, but I'm talking 10, 12, 10, 12 person formats. He's right there in that boom bust wide receiver 3, range. But there's an opportunity, for him to improve. I mean, this is a talented player, and he and Baker Mayfield have shown in the past that they do have some chemistry. So he's a guy that for me, if I've got receiver issues or if I did lose Odell Beckham Jr., I'm definitely putting in bids on him tonight, and I'm not going to go overboard, but I'm also not going to be shy about it if I think I need him. The other guy I would mention, obviously is, the other thing is the tight ends in this offense, have just really exploded over the last few weeks. So if you look at, what happened a couple of weeks ago, actually over the last 2 weeks before this last week's game, you had Austin Hooper really starting to take off. He was getting back into the tight end one conversation this last weekend. Harrison Bryant picked up right where Hooper was because of the appendectomy. And so we don't know if Hooper's going to be available this week, but the sharp move is if you can, and you've got room, if people dropped Hooper, he's a great pickup, and if you need a tight end one for the weekend because you got a bye situation, or you just don't like who you have and you hear that Harrison Bryant is going to be starting because Hooper's out, he's a great spot start, to get into your lineup. I think the Millie Maker winner last week had Harrison Bryant, in their tight end spot, Ian. So there's that.
Can definitely echo those, your sentiment on Rashard Higgins. Called him an upside wide receiver 3 option on the waiver wire edition of this podcast that was released on Tuesday. So with it there, you're not firing him up and pretending like he's got that same, wide receiver 1 ceiling as OBJ. But hey, he's not OBJ, and that's fine. He can still be an upside wide receiver 3 as a starting wide receiver in this offense. Next matchup here, we got the Vikings at the Packers. Green Bay sitting as 6.5 point favorites. Over under down slightly from 56 to 55. So with this Vikings passing game, we know if Dalvin Cook's going to be healthy, that he's going to be the main guy there. And even if he's not healthy, just realize that Alexander Mattison, more weeks than not, is going to be flirting with 15 to 20 touches. As badly as that Atlanta game went, I do think that if they ran that game out, 1,000 times, that would be, towards the bottom of his kind of outcomes with that. But I want to talk about this passing game because this one is setting up as more of a situation where the Vikings could have to put their foot on the gas for 60 minutes. And Kirk Cousins, we've seen some down moments. He always kind of has one or two of these games where you just wonder what this guy is even doing. But as a whole this year, career high marks in yards per attempt at 8.1 and also average target depth at 10.6. So look, the offense doesn't want to pass, but when they do, it's been efficient and it's been of the fantasy friendly variety. So I truly think both Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson can keep this up into the second half of the season. I mean, Jefferson, I got to get more careful about calling guys auto starts because inevitably I say someone's an auto start and one of you people out there in a 5-person league will send me some roster with, 4 top 12 wide receivers and prove me wrong. So not an auto start, but he's someone that should be in the vast majority of fantasy football lineups out there. Only Devontae Adams is averaging more yards per route run this season than Justin Jefferson. He's been doing everything just you could ask for from a receiver and truly looks like potentially the number 1 guy out of this class. And then Adam Thielen, the dude is on pace for 19 receiving touchdowns this season. He's probably going to see shadow treatment from Jair Alexander again, but everyone loves to talk about Jair shutting down Fuller and Ridley and Mike Evans. But you look at it, what's that week 1 matchup Jair had? That was Adam Thielen hanging 6 catches, 110 yards, and 2 touchdowns on arguably the best cornerback from the 2020 season. So look, it's a hard job. Jair barely ever has safety health, but this idea that Thielen is always we've seen both Thielen and Stephon Diggs this year prove that they're anyone's idea of a wide receiver 1 in their own right. It sucks we had to have that conversation for the past few years, wondering if one was the product of the other. Let's just all accept that both Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are great football players, and it looks like the same is also true for Justin Jefferson. Dwayne, what's going on with the Packers?
Yeah, man. And Thielen owning Alexander is nothing new. So if we go back to 2018, 12 for 131 and a touchdown, 9 for 125 and a touchdown. Now, the next year, if you remember, Thielen was banged up off and on. So he had 5 for 75, no touchdowns. And then in the last game of the year, Thielen was really banged up. So he didn't post a catch, in the coverage, snaps that Alexander had him. But like you said, you already touched on what happened week 1. So, I mean, I'm not worried about it at all. I'm using Thielen in all formats. Happy to use him in tournament plays as well. So if by chance, that shadow coverage, scares off, a few percentage, points of ownership, then, I'll take that on Thielen all day long. On the other side of the ball, obviously, I don't have to tell anybody to start Davante Adams, but I mean, it's a great matchup. This is the second best matchup of the week from a fantasy perspective for wide receivers. Aaron Rodgers is actually absolutely back on point. He talked about the week before when they really got, blown out by Tampa that they needed a wake-up call. Well, he responded, really well this week. So you're going to start your Packers receivers. Just keep an eye on Allen Lazard. He's not going to play this week, but, he's getting closer to coming back. So when he does, most likely he will take back over that number 2 wide receiver role in a very potent offense, and Marquise Valdes-Scantling will go back to wide receiver 3.
Okay. All right, moving on here. We got the Saints at the Bears. New Orleans sitting as 3-point favorites. Over-under is at 47. So I'm going to list some receivers right now, and you're gonna know all of them. They're all studs. We got DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Lockett, Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Travis Kelce, Robbie Anderson, Adam Thielen, Terry McLaurin, Tyler Boyd, and Allen Robinson. Now, why did I list all these solid wide receivers? Because those are the only guys this season that have more PPR points from purely receiving production than Alvin Kamara. This guy is literally a fantasy wide receiver 1, and everything we get at the rushing usage is just a cherry on top of the sundae that is Alvin Kamara RB1 season. Even with Christian McCaffrey coming back, let's say he comes back full health and gets his role, it's going to be tough to potentially fire him up over Kamara again. You brought up that great stat earlier about, the usual average of running backs being their quarterback's first read. And I believe he said the average about 35-36%. That's what Teddy Bridgewater is at this year, throwing to Mike Davis and even McCaffrey before that. He's right there at that league average. Kyle Allen, as we're seeing in Washington this year, was nowhere near that league average. He targeted McCaffrey on his first read on 54% of his, targets to McCaffrey last season. So it's a little bit unsure if McCaffrey's going to eat to the same extent we saw last year. And currently this year, Kamara's not getting the same, 20-plus rush attempts that we've seen McCaffrey get. But, in formats where we're getting an entire point per reception, we care far more about that passing usage. And, oh my gosh, it's literally bigger than McCaffrey's was last year because Kamara is on pace for 123 receptions, not 81, 123. And CMC's 2019 position record was there at 116. So, Alvin Kamara, was someone that was banged up last year, kind of affected his tackle breaking ability, but you see him out there, man, just one of the most fun players to watch with the ball in his hands, period. And the fact he's getting this fantasy friendly of a workload, you just absolutely love to see it. Overall RB1 of the week, and I'd be surprised if someone really takes him off that mantle in any of these near future weeks that are coming up here soon. What's going on with the Bears?
Yeah, the big thing with the Bears this week from utilization perspective is Darnell Mooney jumped up to 89% of the routes. He had 18% of the targets, 162 air yards. Now, I do believe one of those came at the very end, just kind of, Foles chunking one up. So you got to count some of that in. But, the Bears really need, a second option, to step up. Now, Jimmy Graham's been nice. But they need somebody to help stretch the field. Now, while Allen Robinson can do that, he's really best served, more like, a Davante Adams, working intermediate, working underneath. Yeah, he can get down the field, but he's the guy that just keeps everything moving for you, and you need somebody else to help stretch the field, push that safety off the top, and maybe Darnell Mooney can do that. Who knows if they can get any kind of quarterback play to make that worth it. But just so you guys know, if you're playing in a super deep league, Mooney is a guy that you can pay attention to. He's gonna see some valuable targets down the stretch. The only other thing I'll say, and I want to get your thoughts, Ian, I'm done. David Montgomery, yes, he's getting all the utilization, but I've seen enough. The guy, the things he did that made him really good in college are not good enough in the NFL. His foot quickness his foot speed is not enough, and he made guys miss. He used wiggle. He's a lateral guy. He doesn't get north and south enough. He really overcuts holes. He makes these huge jump cuts when really he just needs a little one. So there's just all parts of his game. It's not like it's just his driver. It's like his putter, his wedge, his mid irons. All of it is just off. The only thing he has going for him is volume, and he's a guy that I've watched pretty closely over the last 3 weeks. And man, I just don't see it for David Montgomery.
As a friend of the podcast, The Ringer's Danny Kelly said, if you need 10 fantasy points, David Montgomery will get you 10. If you need 13 fantasy points, David Montgomery will get you 10. So I'm with you, man. We've actually seen the broken tackles metrics get up there. And that's what kind of fooled me in the first half of the season, thinking that we were going to see him, take this nice leap forward. But ultimately, he has just one run over 15 yards. You see it on the film. It's clear as day to anyone watching it. He just doesn't have that sort of explosiveness to consistently pick up chunk yards. At some point, man, look, we're looking at the 27th ranked offense right now. I mean, they got to do something to try to spark this run game if they're not going to be able to do it from the quarterback position. I wish my guy Cordero Patterson was just, ripping off chunk gains behind him and, really pushing for more time, but that hasn't exactly been the reality either. Other than Allen Robinson, yeah, tough to really see anyone in this offense providing, something resembling consistent fantasy production. Next matchup here, we got the 49ers at the Seahawks, battle of banged up backfields. We got the Seahawks sitting 3.5 point favorites, opened up at 6.5, over-unders at 54. So I'm not sure if Jimmy G can keep up when these weapons are gone. They don't have, the high-quality run game, and now that yak god, Deebo Samuel, is going to be out for at least 1 or 2 weeks. So, this year, 67.9% of Jimmy G's passing yards have come on yards after the catch. Dwayne Haskins is the only quarterback over even 60%, and it's literally Kyle Shanahan making Jimmy G into this incredible quarterback that I'm not even saying Jimmy G is bad, but for him to average 9.1 yards per attempt on throws behind the line of scrimmage, the NFL average is 5.5. So we're truly talking about, one of these flips or a screen. Kyle Shanahan is making those types of plays literally almost twice as efficient as, the average NFL offense. So it's wild. Hey, it works to Jimmy G's benefit. And I understand fantasy land, like it doesn't, a 10-yard pass is a 10-yard pass all the same, whether it's him, getting 10 air yards on it or, in Jimmy G's usual case, like 0.5 inches of air yards on it. But you take Deebo out of the equation. We don't have, Mostert. We're hoping McKinnon or Hasty or one of these guys to step up. We still got George Kittle, and I do like Brandon Ayuk, but I just wonder, man, like this has been the cakest matchup of the year against the Seattle secondary. And other than Kittle and Ayuk, I'm just not sure I can be too comfortable with anyone because we don't know what's going on with the backfield. If Tevin Coleman comes back particularly, it's going to be a three-headed committee for sure. And if he doesn't, okay, then I'm a little bit more behind Hasty and McKinnon, but I just don't quite trust Jimmy Garoppolo when the going is going to get tough eventually, which I understand it might not this week. I don't think he has shown enough this year to make us think that he can do what he couldn't do last year, put the offense on his back when they need him to do it. I understand that rarely happens, but just haven't seen much this year to indicate that he is capable of doing that when they'll need him to. What's going on with the Seahawks, Dwayne?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news for Jimmy G is that, when he's not pressured, he's fine. The bigger issue will be, you just can't let Seattle jump out, to a big lead. And the 49ers, their defense has been definitely more suspect than what we were used to last year, but they've been quietly solid. Kind of to your point earlier around Indianapolis, they haven't been tested, repeatedly by good offenses. So there's some of that you wonder how much of that is really built in, to some of their performances. But for me, I think Jimmy G is a solid option, this week. And I think, Ayuk, if you've got him, like, you got to get him in your lineup, unless you're in a really, small format. But if you're in, a 12-person league, you got anybody on bye, I'm happy to get Ayuk into, my lineup. He and Kittle are going to be peppered, with targets. You could even see, in a tournament play, maybe a guy like Bourne. But the key will be is the game needs to stay close, because that's when Kyle Shanahan can keep all of these cool things that you talked about intact, which are what really helps Jimmy G, succeed. He is a system quarterback. That's just what it is. If he's truly in a situation where he's got to drop back and he's got to throw the ball multiple times and the opposing team knows that it's coming, that's really not where he succeeds. So that's going to be the key. If the 49ers can keep the game within a touchdown, even 10 points, early on, they'll stick with what they're doing. But if they're all of a sudden down by 14 going into halftime, that's going to be a problem, which is always a possibility when you're playing Russell Wilson and his weapons. But I'm fine with Jimmy G on my teams this week, where I do have him, as my backup and I need him. I'm going to start him in a few spots. I think that, he's going to be a fringe quarterback one play. And if the game stays close, you're going to be really happy with Jimmy G this weekend.
All right, now hit me with some Seahawks goodness.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, as far as the, I looked at this, at the 49ers first. I was like, dude, why's he doing the 49ers?
You good, brother.
Yeah, Yeah, you guys know. I mean, with the Seahawks, I mean, there's nothing that I need to tell you that you don't already know. I mean, it's essentially you've got DK Metcalf. You've got Russell Wilson. You've got Tyler Lockett. You're gonna start them all. And it doesn't really matter what the matchup is. In fact, like, it's funny, right? It goes back and forth. Everybody wants to have this big debate about which one's the best, right? Which one is the one that you want to own on your teams. The answer is you're happy to own either one of them, and then if anybody just feels, overly confident that, they have the guy that isn't the one to own, then you should be trying to trade for them. But they're must starts every single week. Their offense is ridiculous. Russell Wilson's ability to drop balls like from the heaven. And it's funny, commentators are finally picking up on this. Like, this has been going on forever, but now they're actually, talking about his moon ball and things like that. But like, I've marveled at that for like forever. Like, even that pass to the back line, when they were down inside probably the 15 to Tyler Lockett. I mean, Tyler Lockett's a small guy, but Russell Wilson is so accurate in the way he can place the ball. It's just almost impossible to defend. I mean, you saw it right out of the gate, the very first play of the game, against Patrick Peterson, to lock it down the sideline. So it's truly something special, man. Wilson's easily the QB1. He's on pace for a record-type fantasy season. So just enjoy it if you have it.
Last point on this game I want to ask you about the Seahawks. So this backfield is all kinds of banged up right now. It sounds like Chris Carson probably isn't going to play, but we also got Hyde dealing with hamstring tightness. Homer's got a knee bruise. Rashad Penny's probably going to be away for another week. We're going to need to see how these practice reports and the injury report, shakes out. But let's say Hyde is good to go for Sunday, and we don't have reason to believe that he's going to be limited. Where do you kind of see ranking him in this spot?
Yeah, I think you're going to treat him similar to Chris Carson. I don't think he's going to get used quite as much, in the passing game as what they've done with Chris Carson. I think you'll see Homer and DJ Dallas get a little bit more of that work. So I think he's in the RB2, conversation, though. I'm not going to get carried away, with him beyond that. And here's the reason why. Like, we've seen it. Like, even, whenever you look at Chris Carson, he's living on efficiency. It's not like the guy's getting 20, 25 carries, even though they'll build huge leads. He's having to live on the 10 to 15 range, and then he gets a few targets, and he's getting into the end zone. So Hyde did that last week. He ran strong, that one play, where he got his touchdown run, he managed to stay in bounds. It's just like the blocking that he got, from Tyler Lockett, on kind of this, on a downhill play where he's on a toss play, and Tyler Lockett comes across, just cuts the DB. I think that was actually Patrick Peterson. I mean, these guys are going all out. So I'd put him in the RB2 range, but I wouldn't quite, expect him to just fully replace what you see from, Chris Carson.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, I mean, we've had running backs like Mike Davis in the past, Chase Edmonds this week, even Boston Scott, where we knew we were probably at least getting 2 usable weeks. I'm just not sure if there's enough, expected time being missed from Carson, and even to a lesser extent Penny, to feel too good about using a bunch of fab on Carlos Hyde. But I'm with you. If he's out there, he will be good for some RB2 production for at least this week. Quick shout out here, PFF and Sunday Night's Football, Chris Collinsworth is team of one of the best players on and off the field, 49ers All-Pro cornerback Richard Sherman. The Chris Collinsworth podcast featuring Richard Sherman is available now wherever you find your podcasts. They'll provide the most interesting football conversation in sports every single week, and sometimes that means the discussion will venture off the field too. Additionally, Chris will be taking a dive into the game of football as he sees it, inviting in the best and brightest to talk about everything that's happening in the great game of football. So mark your calendars. You do not want to miss the best 60 minutes of insight this season. Thank you all for sticking with us. We have 3 more matchups, and then we are getting out of here. We got the Chargers at the Broncos up next. And, look, we have 5 quarterbacks this season that are averaging at least 25 fantasy points per game. Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, and Mr. Justin Herbert. 26.2 fantasy points per game from Herbert this season. And he did it against tough competition. And that is the most wild part about this whole thing. I mean, the same Tampa Bay defense that made Aaron Rodgers look more mortal than we've seen since 2019 was a situation where Herbert was able to repeatedly beat them down the field. He's getting pressure a ton. We're going to see a floor game at some point. This guy is going to keep playing this good. But you know what? Chargers have a good roster. Herbert's more ready than we expected. And, I don't care what, everyone out there there that's, been a draft expert or just really following these guys or had a big time opinion on Herbert going to the year, we got to change our opinions on these guys with what we have at the NFL level. So, okay, Herbert, he's in a much cozier situation than Burrow right now. I get it, but we can't just continue to go the well with Burrow over Herbert and with these other guys over Herbert, because that's what we've been looking at for the past few months. We need to focus on what's been happening this year with Justin Herbert, and that is that he has been a consistent top 5, top 6 quarterback. So I have him ranked as a QB7 this week. Again, I don't want to hear like borderline QB1. This guy is a legit locked in QB1 that should be starting in pretty much any fantasy league unless you have a top 5, top 6 option at the position and are just overly stacked. So end the season schedule coming up: Broncos, Raiders, Dolphins, Jets, Bills, Patriots, Falcons, Raiders, Broncos. I mean, I get it. The Dolphins and Patriots are above average defenses, but other than that, we got absolute smash spots coming up. And look, 24.2 rushing yards per game. We have seen him, get in situations where they get down the scoreboard. He's still able to move the ball even when they know the pass is coming. Again, this is a weekly fantasy QB1. Everyone, do not get it twisted. What's going on with maybe not quite the same caliber fantasy QB in Drew Lock and the Broncos, Dwayne?
That was actually going to be my lead-in. Drew Lock is the opposite of everything that you just basically said. And the Broncos, they have problems, so it isn't just all on Lock. But at the same time, they have a nice core of weapons. Ian, they've got Jerry Jeudy, who's back to being healthy. You've got, surprise production, coming out of other guys like Tim Patrick. You get Noah Fant back last week. He still wasn't fully healthy, but I think he'll be close. I think this next week, you'll probably see Fant back to his normal complement, of targets, working in the underneath and intermediate areas of the field. But yeah, it's a week where I'm just really, if you got Melvin Gordon, you're going to have to keep an eye on Philip Lindsay, but most likely he won't be in the game this week. So Gordon could have a revenge game type scenario. The Chargers are not a bad matchup. They're neutral really, from a running back perspective. They're positive for a tight end. So Fant's the guy that I would lean to, the most. But the problem is just what you mentioned. I'm not excited about using any of these guys unless I'm in a really deep league, just because of the issues that Lock's having, and just they're just not in sync. Their offense, when you watch it, it's out of sync. They just can't get into a rhythm. Unlike, it's again the opposite. When you see the Chargers, things are just clicking. If they happen to have a negative play, they can overcome it. When you're watching the Broncos, one bad thing happens, it's like the whole thing falls apart. It's like Dallas, in that way. Not quite as bad as Dallas, but they're really struggling. So I'm trying to avoid Broncos, any way that I can. But if you own Jerry Jeudy, that is looking up 96% of the routes, 82% of the routes over the last 2 weeks. So it does look like he is going to be the receiver on the field for the most part, all the time whenever they're in passing situations.
Yeah, Drew Lock's 18-yard average target depth in week 6 dipped all the way to 6.9 in week 7. It did kind of seem like at some point, man, with all the pressure and just not having much success, kind of seemed to get a little bit shook back there. Had the awesome read option. He was talking shit on it. I was all in on, the Swagger Fest thing, but no, maybe my AFC West Jameis proclamations were just a bit too soon, but we'll see. I still think I still think that worst case scenario, Drew Lock can be an entertaining, terrible quarterback in this league. We'll see if he can be anything else. Sunday Night Football, Cowboys at the Eagles. Yes, I'm groaning inside too, everybody. Not seeing a line at the moment due to the Andy Dalton situation, depending on who we're going to see under center, but 43.5 point game total, because I think Vegas knows, like we know, that you can put anyone under center in this offense, and if they're not Dak Prescott, it's going to be hard to expect much of anything here. The reason why the Cowboys from 2014 to really the early parts of 2020 could lose wide receivers and running backs and even their quarterback and still put together, high-end offensive football was because of this offensive line that's always been a treasure chest of ex-first-round picks and just some of the best guys in the league. You take away literally every single one of those first-round picks from the offensive line, and this is what you're left with. The team that is the only team worse with a worse point differential than the Cowboys this year is the New York Jets, and it really has been that bad, if not worse this year. Even in the wins they've had, Giants got up on them quick. It was a miracle to beat the Falcons. Just absolutely brutal. So you know what? We got Ezekiel Elliott. He's still the PPR RB2 somehow throughout all this because of all the receptions and touchdowns. Amari Cooper has that Mike McCarthy. He is the legit alpha number 1 wide receiver role. Maybe CeeDee Lamb can get going. I wouldn't really count on it, in the immediate future. I'd like to see more than one wide receiver get enabled in this offense. But man, other than Cooper and Zeke, I don't think there's anyone on the Cowboys that you can fire up a confidence, which is just so far away from what we were saying a couple weeks ago. Incredibly unfortunate, but impossible situation, particularly against a defensive line like the Eagles, I think can really take advantage of all those holes across the Dallas front. Dwayne, what's going on with the Eagles?
Man, one quick question for you. And if we're being realistic, right, really what is Zeke rest of the season? I know it's weird to say this, right? But looking at the line, looking at the quarterback situation, the game scripts are terrible. Everything you said is true. Like, his volume's going to be there, but what is, where are you ranking him right now rest of the way?
I would say low-end RB1 still. I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where, we're seeing Pollard actively cut into the workload unless the Cowboys are just getting viciously blown out, which I understand is a, potential weekly occurrence at the moment. But I just think with Zeke, he does have 4 games with at least 6 catches this year. When the Cowboys do happen to find their way in the red zone, I mean, he's going to be the overwhelming favorite to get there. So it's not pretty, but, at the end of the day, this is just, volume over talent. And unfortunately, Zeke has not been showing off the type of talent that we thought he had.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think he's still in the RB1, conversation. But if you can move him for a lot,
yes, absolutely.
Right now in a league where somebody's still totally attached to the Zeke name, and maybe you can get 2 really good players back, I absolutely would do it, because the touchdown upside is really what Zeke. Yes, he's insulated because he gets work, but his touchdown upside is always behind that line, and in a good offense was always would anybody be surprised if he scored 15 to 16 touchdowns? The answer is no, and that upside was always there. That's gone now. We're going to be lucky to see, Zeke, over the rest of the season. Who knows? I mean, he's going to struggle to score a touchdown, maybe every other game if they don't get things turned around. So the volume will be there, but I'm with Ian. I think he's a low-end RB1. As far as the Eagles go, let me give you, a number here, Ian, and it's just out of the blue, and you just have to tell me what it means. 32.
Days until we celebrate signing Jalen Reagor this week.
Maybe, but that's the number of targets that Travis Fulgham has.
Okay, that was a good guess by me, though.
That was a good guess. Dude, this is insane, this guy. 12, 9, and 11. He and Carson Wentz clearly have something going. I don't see this changing no matter who comes back, who gets healthy. It doesn't matter. Alshon Jeffrey. I'm excited about Reagor. They need another playmaker. I'm excited that they'll get Goddard back. They'll eventually get Ertz back. They should be the team that wins the East, because they're just going to continue to get more and more and more healthy. But I think they found something, in this guy, at least for this season. It's, it's clear to me that, Carson Wentz loves him. What's interesting is, he doesn't get all the first read targets, Ian. His first read targets, 44% and 64%. So, he's literally typically the second guy or after in the progression, but he's the guy that I think it's covered. I'll just throw it over here to Fulgham and he'll make it happen. But I think, when you look at Fulgham, you just have to consider him to be in the wide receiver 2 conversation, even though we didn't know who the guy was pretty much, coming into the season. I knew a little bit about him from college, but I didn't expect this. But he's just the volume. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't argue with it. The only other guy we would talk about real quick is, Boston Scott. Obviously in a good situation here against the Cowboys. I would be fine getting, Scott into your lineups this weekend. We'll keep an eye on the Miles Sanders thing. But, as far as, the last I've seen is he isn't very likely to play this week. We'll keep an eye on practice reports. But, Scott was the clear leader in the backfield last week. 69% of the snaps, 43% of the rushing attempts, 86% of the 2-minute offense. Probably won't be needing that much against the Cowboys. But the long down and distance, 63%, and 83% of the snaps inside the 5. So Scott, he is sharing a little bit of time, but he showed last week that it wasn't going to be this situation where Corey Clement, is, eating into 40%, of his work. If they get out to a lead, you could see a little bit more of Clement. Last week, they were in comeback mode all week, and I think that helped Scott some, but the matchup is great against the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that, even when we're looking at running back groups, we can't just stop the analysis there. With Jerick McKinnon not being used, one of the reasons why we were able to kind of predict that was that, okay, when Raheem Mostert was out the first time, so were Deebo and George Kittle. When, Boston Scott was in week 1, they had all their healthy skill position guys. So, when you take away a bunch of these just top playmakers in the offense, or you add them back to the equation, we can't assume, a backup running backs could be leaned on as heavily or as lightly as they were before. With you on Travis Travis Fulgham, man. It seems like every time Carson Wentz starts doing something stupid, the ball just ends up going to Fulgham, and then it doesn't end up being that stupid all the time. I mean, there was a moment where he was standing in the end zone holding the football with Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphreys on the ground around him. And I just had to accept, like you're accepting now, that this man is going to be a consistent wide receiver 2 in the year 2020. Last one for you here, everyone. Thank you for sticking here with us. We got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New York Giants on Monday Night Football. Buccaneers open at 8.5. They are up to 10.5 point favorites. Over under staying steady at 47. So Tom Brady throwing the ball as well as ever. I know that Chris Godwin is out with this fractured finger, and Mike Evans, playing through the pain. So Scotty Miller, even Tyler Johnson, I think it's, looking good for this week. But hey, Antonio Brown is going to come in and be almost an immediate upside wide receiver 2 in this offense. I mean, look, you can think what you want about Antonio Brown as a person, or if, he's even going to be the same overall talent that he was, in the year 2018, last time we saw him play consistent stretches. Just realize that while all of us are kind of debating these things and character concerns on the internet, we've had Russell freaking Wilson and Tom Brady recruiting this dude for the better part of the last 6 months. So apparently when Brady came to Tampa, the 2 guys he wanted were Gronk and AB. It's what Brady wants. That's who he's going to throw the ball to. And when now we look at a situation where, we were wondering, okay, how is AB going to fit alongside Evans and Godwin? Now he just might be the only healthy wide receiver they even have out there. So, hopefully he scooped up AB. It's one of those situations, the classic Wednesday at 3 p.m. He didn't really have a chance to make it through waivers and all that. So, but yeah, I'm going to be starting him, in the leagues I picked him up in as early as week 9. Like, I don't think we need to wait around on this. They would not have made this splash and even deal with all these headaches if they didn't have the intention of getting him on the field. So loving AB week 9 and beyond. Then quickly in this backfield, because this is actually pretty huge news from last week with what's going on. This has been a 3 RB backfield ever since last season. And, with Leonard Fournette coming back, the concern was that he's going to come back, take away some of the early down work from Rojo, and then we still have either LaShawn McCoy or Keyshawn Vaughn on special teams, on pass downs. That is not what happened, everyone. This is very interesting because LaShawn McCoy just got benched and Keyshawn Vaughn was special teams only. So after the game, Coach Bruce Arians confirmed that Fournette is the team's new, they're calling it a nickel RB, which I don't hate. That's not a terrible terminology, but it's a 2 RB backfield, everyone. 2, not 3, 2. We can work with this. This is going to be something in the range now of 15 to 20, maybe like 12 to 15, but 12 to 15 opportunities per game inside the league's 3rd-ranked scoring offense for both Fournette and Rojo. And you know what? We mocked everyone that said Fournette was a good receiver just because he caught 70-plus balls last season. He was, the second least efficient, high-usage receiver in the league. But Tampa Bay views him as the pass-down back. He caught all but 1 target last week. That's going to be valuable. And, we got to wipe away the whole fade Leonard Fournette thing because right now he's looking at a consistent RB2 workload, as is Ronald Jones. I really don't think that Fournette coming on is going to be this big disservice to Ronald Jones. Rojo's earned a role. They clearly want Fournette to have a role. I think both these guys can be, somewhat consistent every week RB2s. Dwayne, do you agree with me on this backfield? And then what's up with the Giants?
Yeah, somebody needs to tell, you said that Arians called him their nickel running back. So somebody needs to tell Arians what nickel means because really he should be considered their dime running back. You know what happened? So last week, for the first time this season, the Bucs really unveiled this 4 wide receiver, 10 personnel look for 16 plays. That's 22% of the snaps. Up until that point in the season, they had 6 total snaps from that personnel grouping. And what was interesting about it is in every single one of those plays, Fournette was the back on the field. In fact, at the end of this, in the second quarter, I believe it was the second drive, that the Bucs had, they went to this formation, and that's really where a big chunk of Fournette's work came, on the day. Rojo was still out there starting the game, the first series, the second series, when they started off, under center, and they're only in shotgun, on 3rd down. But now what you're seeing is what we saw from Brady, right? Really in New England. They've got all these different ways they can come out and basically probe the opposing offense and see here's what we think is going to work today, but what's going to actually work. And so they just kind of shifted gears and they went to this 4, wide receiver look. And back to your comments about Antonio Brown, we could continue to see more of this. But I think what they like, about Fournette in that situation is he's the better pass blocker. I think he's a decent receiver. They're not asking him to run down the field a lot. They're still more check down and variety, but they got these other receivers working down the field, taking all the defenders with them. You get, a big guy like Fournette, out into space, DB's trying to tackle him. I think there's going to be some really good things, to your point, that are going to happen there. I consider both of them to still be in that running back 3 territory because I do want to see. If there are games where the Bucs just go away from this 4 wide receiver set, does that mean now all of a sudden that Fournette's going to lose 15 to 20 snaps in the game? So I think we've still got to see that. What was interesting is Gronk was not on the field for those plays either. So essentially, it's 4 wide receivers and Fournette. That's essentially what they're trying to do. So thought that was an interesting thing on Fournette. Not a ton, man. On the Giants, I was more excited to talk about the Bucs because of what you were mentioning and that little nugget. The biggest thing I would say is that Sterling Shepard wasn't just stuck in the slot. It was actually Golden Tate that was working in the slot, and Sterling Shepard was on the field for 79% of the routes versus only 62% of Golden Tate. Obviously, we know Darius Slayton never leaves the field, and he's the guy that's going to be the vertical stretch element. But it does look like Sterling Shepard could be the number 2 option, potentially the number 1 option from a target perspective. I think the most value still belongs to Slayton because this isn't a great offense. So essentially it's just nice if you can get a big play here or there, you get a touchdown. But Shepard looks like he could be, back to health. I know he's got a toe issue, but he looked decent and he was the top target for Daniel Jones.
I'm with you. It's Shepard or Slayton. At least we know that Golden Tate is kind of out of the picture in terms of really taking over this passing game. So if you can go get Shepard out there, someone wasn't happy with him, cut him during that injury, go get him, everyone. You can do worse than 6 targets per game on a near weekly basis. All right, everyone, that is going to do it. Thank you, as always, for listening to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Everyone, make sure you go on Twitter, follow Dwain at Dwain McFarland. You might see his name. Context matters popping out there. Yeah, Dwain, is the utilization report already up on PFF.com?
Yeah, man, it's up. Submitted it early this morning, so it's up and going and ready to rock. So people go check it out.
Early week grinding. You love to see it. Thank you, Dwain, for coming on as always. And thank you for listening to this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Ian Hartitz, and until next time, take care, everybody.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.